Time now to take a look at the international press with Elena Casas. Elena, we're going to start off with how the papers are covering the Amanda Knox trial, or the verdict.
Hello again, Claire. Yes, there's one photo really on every one of the international papers we've had in this morning. This one, Amanda Knox crying as she gets her acquittal there on the front page of the Times. The story's been treated very differently, though, by the American press and by the British press. Of course, Knox is American and the victim in this murder, Meredith Kercher, was British. Let's look first at the New York Times, which is pretty typical of the American attitude, very celebratory, saying Amanda Knox's ordeal is finally over, saying there was just the forensic evidence was a joke by international standards and there was a non-existent motive playing to medieval superstitions. They emphasised that she was originally put through long nights of questioning with no lawyer or translator at a time when she didn't really speak Italian. And they say the prosecution arguments should make any defender of women howl. As you might remember, they used quite colourful language, those Italian prosecution lawyers, calling her a she-devil and a witch. And the New York Times says, thank goodness she's finally been freed. The British tabloids, though, take a rather different approach. They're obviously keen to emphasise the suffering of the families of Meredith Kercher, but also quite keen to see Knox convicted. Some of them seem to be. The Daily Mail actually published a false front page yesterday evening, which was up for several hours before they changed it, which we can see there, saying that Knox had actually been convicted, calling her guilty. The actual front page that's been published this morning is scarcely less accusatory. Their headline is "Free to Make a Fortune," and they talk about in the paper about how her first TV interview could be one of the most lucrative in TV history, saying American networks ABC, CBS and NBC are frantically competing to get that first interview with Amanda Knox as soon as she gets back. Of course, most of those networks officially don't ever pay interviewees, but the Mail says there's lots of ways they have of getting generous incentives into interviewees' bank accounts. And according to the Mail and several other British tabloids, Knox could become very rich and very famous as a result of this. So really very different press coverage on both sides of the Atlantic.
That might be true, but it's still quite cynical of them nonetheless. Now, we've also been talking to Amnesty International this morning about Syria, and The Guardian has put that story on their front page, this story about persecution possibly happening outside of Syria as well.
Yes, my Guardian hasn't come this morning, but they have put it on their front page if we can have a look. They, of course, are talking, as you were with the Amnesty International interviewee, about Syrian activists being pursued abroad. Here in Paris, apparently people have been beaten up by pro-Assad demonstrators who the French police couldn't pursue because they had diplomatic passports. And activists in Germany, Sweden and the UK are worried that they're being filmed during demonstrations and that footage is being used to find and target their family members back in Syria, who've then been beaten up. Now, The Guardian in their editorial says that Western countries are already doing a pretty bad job of protecting those Syrian demonstrators protesting against the regime in Syria. They haven't taken decisive international action. You would think, The Guardian says, they could at least protect those Syrian opposition activists who are actually in the West. So why aren't they doing more?
Now, we've had a lot of scandals here in France about the illegal financing of political campaigns, and now there's one in the US as well.
Yes, I've taken this from The Independent, but it's from an American inquiry that was carried out and published at the weekend. This is about, everyone's heard, of course, of the Tea Party, the right-wing Republican group in the US, but it's less well known internationally that they're mostly financed by the very wealthy petrochemical millionaire brothers David and Charles Koch. Now, according to this inquiry, they sold tens of millions of dollars worth of petrochemicals to Iran as recently as 2007 in defiance of a US embargo. So that probably won't go down very well with the Republican right audience who vote for the Tea Party. This has come out actually of a Labour case that's been happening in court here in Paris, where a former employee of theirs says that he was sacked for complaining about bribes that were paid to African and Middle Eastern countries. So they're accused of some quite insalubrious business practices.
And quickly to finish off with Iceland and women being very well off there, apparently.
Yes, it came top of an international survey for the best country for women to live recently. So a Guardian reporter has been there to find out if it really is a feminist paradise. They do come top of international surveys for things like maternity care, the results that women get in education, and the number of women in politics. But they find out that for Icelandic feminists, it's still not good enough. They're protesting angrily against the pay gap there, which is just 10% between men and women, as opposed to nearer 30% here in France. But the Icelandic feminists aren't complacent. They recently organised a protest protest in which shops across Reykjavik agreed to give women a 10% discount in protest against that, which would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, good for them.
Yes, the Guardian reporter says she's amazed at how powerful the feminist movement there is. Apparently a third of all working women in Iceland recently joined a protest against that pay gap.
Okay, thank you very much for that look at the international papers, Elena Cassis.